Welcome to your virtual tour of the now currently closed Musee Conti Historical Wax Museum. Once located at 917 Conti Street, it was founded by Isidore Lazarus and Ben Weil in 1964. The museum featured 147 figures depicting life-size scenes of over 200 years of Louisiana history from 1699 through 1910, plus additional figures from the 1900s. Several of the actual locations depicted in the wax scenes are on our New Orleans Insider Tour. The museum shut down in January of 2016, but join me as we explore what was considered by many to be one of the greatest wax museums ever created. We begin our journey in 1699 with the rediscovery of the Mississippi River. Here we see Iberville and Bienville, along with Father Douai and the Mogalacha Indian chief. The scene depicts the Indian chief delivering a letter to Bienville that was left by Henri de Tonty. Although La Salle had already claimed the Mississippi River basin for France in 1682, he was assassinated before completing his expedition. If Bienville could find the letter and also the blue coat that was given to the Indian chief, then they could prove they were actually on the Mississippi River. Although we see Iberville in this scene, he was actually not present during this historic meeting. Next, we move on to 1717, where we plan the city of New Orleans. Bienville chose the site for the city in 1718, named to honor the Duke of Orleans. Here we see the Duke of Orleans seated on the right, John Law standing in the center, and Louis Armstrong de Bourbon on the left. The scene depicts John Law explaining his scheme to use the not yet constructed city to reconstruct the tattered finances of France. The scandal became known as the Mississippi Bubble. This next scene from 1752 depicts a couple of casket girls outside the Ursuline convent on Charter Street. Casket girls were sent over from France as gifts to the new male colonists. First setting foot in New Orleans in 1728, the long journey had them arriving sickly and pale, carrying their belongings in small caskets resembling coffins. There are many versions of the legend describing how the casket girls brought vampires to New Orleans. Here we see a scene from 1768 depicting the execution of Creole Patriots by Spanish authorities. After the French and Indian War came to an end, France ceded control of the Louisiana Territory to Spain in the 1763 Treaty of Paris. French Creoles later rebelled against Spanish authority, leading to an execution of several Creole Patriots. Moving on to 1785. While Louisiana Territory was still under Spanish control, American river traders came to market their wares in the growing city of New Orleans. Conflicts erupted between the two groups, and here we see Governor Esteban Muraut helping to negotiate peaceful resolutions. April 7, 1803 marked the day Napoleon announced his decision to sell the Louisiana Territory to the United States of America. Legend has it that he shared his decision with his brothers Joseph and Lucien while in the bathtub. Note the strategically placed sponge to protect his dignity. The butler by the door is said to have fainted when the brothers began a heated argument over the decision. Here in this scene from 1803, we have the signing of the Louisiana Purchase. The United States purchased the Louisiana Territory for 4 cents an acre on April 30th. Robert Livingston and James Monroe represented the U.S., while Francois Barbé Marbois signed on behalf of France in his very own apartment in Paris. Gathered here in this scene from 1814 are Andrew Jackson, Jean Lafitte, Governor Claiborne, and Dominic Yu. Jean Lafitte had gotten into some hot water with the U.S. government and offered his help to Andrew Jackson in the war, in exchange for a full pardon for him and his men. In 1815, we have the Battle of New Orleans on the Chalmette battlefield. The battle was significant because the Treaty of Ghent had not been ratified yet, and at the time it excluded the Louisiana Purchase. With this victory, America was now inspired to officially adopt and develop the Louisiana Territory. January 8th was a major U.S. day of celebration up until the Civil War, perhaps bigger than the 4th of July. The British Royal Marine Artillery used Congreve rockets in several engagements during the War of 1812. It was the use of these rockets during the war that inspired the 5th line of the first verse of the Star-Spangled Banner. And the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air. Here we see Bernard Marigny playing craps with Jim Bowie in 1816. Marigny was a French Creole-American nobleman, playboy, planter, politician, duelist, writer, horse breeder, and land developer. And although Marigny has been credited with bringing craps to New Orleans, the game was already well established in the city before he returned from studying in Europe. In 1821 New Orleans, here at the present-day Napoleon House, where French sentiment remained strong, a plot was afoot to rescue Napoleon Bonaparte from his exile on St. Helena and bring him to the Crescent City. None of this came to pass, as word of Napoleon's death reached New Orleans before the plot could be set in motion. In this dark scene from 1834, we have the haunted house of evil Madame LaLaurie. The Madame was a Creole socialite and serial killer, known for torturing and murdering slaves in her household. When the discovery of the abused slaves became widely known, a mob of local local citizens attacked the LaLaurie residents and destroyed everything they could find. The madam, however, was able to escape to France to live in exile. New Orleans was a noted hotbed of dueling in 1840. The slightest stain on a gentleman's honor was likely to lead to a duel. Here we see Jose Pepe Loula outside his fencing school in Exchange Alley. Pepe was said to have triumphed in 20 to 30 duels and was known as the last of the great American duelists. This scene also pays homage to the old H Holmes department stores. Here in 1845, we see an example of the cruelty of slavery, where families would be ripped apart and human lives auctioned off to the highest bidder. Featured here is the former slave market at the present-day Omni Royal Orleans Hotel, which is said to be haunted. The Baroness Pontalba was a wealthy New Orleans-born aristocrat, businesswoman, and real estate designer and developer. Here we see her in 1850 building the famous Pontalba buildings in Jackson Square. This is after surviving being shot 4 times in the chest by her father-in-law at point-blank range. I encourage you to dig deeper into the life of this extraordinary woman. Marie Laveau, the Voodoo Queen, wielded tremendous power in her community of 1851 New Orleans. Here we see Marie being paid a late-night visit by a client seeking her counsel and special gifts. People of all races, creeds, and financial backgrounds came to pay their respects and seek her guidance. Here in 1855, we see a voodoo ritual in Congo Square. This snake is very important in the mythos of voodoo. Dambala is the serpent god and is said to have created the world. Representing wisdom of the mind, he is the protector of the helpless and the young children, as well as the handicapped and the deformed. There are 4 phases to a voodoo ritual, all identifiable by the song being sung: preparation, invocation, possession, and farewell. The songs are used to open the gate between the deities and the human world to invite the spirits to possess someone. During the Civil War, New Orleans was captured by Union forces in 1862. However, the occupation of the city did not discourage its residents from showing defiance to Yankee rule. In this scene, Union General Benjamin Butler accuses Confederate Father Mullen of refusing to bury Union soldiers, to which Mullen replied, "The charge is false, General. I'd be delighted to bury any Yankee, including yourself." We also see P.G.T. Beauregard listening in on the exchange. The Marquis de Lafayette was the last surviving French general of the American Revolutionary War in 1824, and he made a tour of the 24 United States from 1824 to 1825, arriving in New Orleans by way of the steamer Natchez and landing in Chalmette on April 11, 1885. There are many legends related to the Grand Duke Alexis Romanov's visit to New Orleans in 1872. The song, If Ever I Cease to Love, was chosen as the anthem to the first Rex Parade in his honor, as it was claimed to be his favorite tune. It is said that after hearing the actress Lydia Thompson perform the song in St. Louis, Missouri, he followed her to New Orleans, where Mardi Gras was in full swing. For the first time in history, Rex, the monarch of Mardi Gras, and his queen would be presented to a former king of England, along with the Duchess of Windsor. Now who was going to bow to whom? Mardi Gras royalty bowed to no one. However, when both the Duke and Duchess bowed and curtsied to the Mardi Gras royalty, the 2,500 guests in attendance responded with deafening applause. In Mark Twain's memoir of his time as a steamboat pilot, Life on the Mississippi, he recounts numerous tales and adventures. Here we see Twain on the right encountering a heated poker game between 2 guests on one of his ships. Here in 1892, we see the first boxing match with padded gloves, where champion John Sullivan was defeated by Jim Corbett, a match that reinvented boxing. The Sullivan-Corbett fight dragged boxing out of the shadows and into the sporting mainstream. New Orleans' prominence as a boxing town is hard to overstate. For years, it was very much the center of the fighting universe. Storyville was established in 1897 by municipal ordinance under the New Orleans City Council to regulate prostitution and drugs. In this scene from 1910, we see prostitutes fighting and robbing unsuspecting sailors. We also see the young Razzie Dazzie Spasm Band in the background. The development of jazz brought pianists experimenting with novel styles in Storyville's entertainment venues. Many aspects of New Orleans' modern identity can be traced back in part to the Storyville district, the most apparent being the city's identity as an adult tourism destination and music hub. This scene pays homage to the New Orleans Theater from 1859 to 1880. On the stage, we have noted performers Sarah Bernhardt, Enrico Caruso, and the infamous American actor John Wilkes Booth. Seated in the viewing box are the Wax Museum's founders, Isidore Lazarus and Ben Wow, along with Swedish opera singer Jenny Lind. In 1891 New Orleans, we have the largest mass lynching in U.S. history, where 11 Italian Americans were murdered by a mob for their alleged role in the murder of police chief David Hennessy. This occurred one day after the trial where 6 of the men were acquitted, and a mistrial was declared for the remainder of the Italian Americans on trial. In a period of heavy anti-Italian sentiment and rising crime, those responsible for the lynchings were never charged. Afterwards, the country of Italy cut off diplomatic relations with the U.S., even sparking rumors of war. In this special miniature exhibit, we see Mardi Gras circa 1900 on the 400 block of Royal Street. Featured here are around 300 miniature floats and figurines. Small wax figures include mule-drawn floats, riders, spectators on the street, hanging out of buildings, and even balloons made from hollow pigeon eggs. Here on Bourbon Street, we have renowned jazz pianist Jelly Roll Morton. Widely recognized as a pivotal figure in early jazz, he always boasted that he himself actually invented jazz, much to the chagrin of musical historians. Also in the back, we see legendary jazz clarinetist Pete Fountain. Fountain's clarinet work was noted for his sweet, fluid tone. The distinctive Fountain's sound came from the crystal mouthpieces he played with since 1949. Mardi Gras Indian chief Allison Tootie Montana was a New Orleans cultural icon who acted as the Mardi Gras Indian chief of chiefs for over 50 years. Tootie is revered in the Mardi Gras Indian culture for changing the violent ways of the Indians' culture. Former Governor Edwin Edwards was a colorful, powerful, and legendary figure in Louisiana politics. In 2001, he was found guilty on racketeering charges and sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. When questioned about receiving illegal campaign contributions, he replied, "It was illegal for them to give, but not for me to receive." Self-nicknamed the Kingfish, Huey P Long was the 40th governor of Louisiana and was a member of the U.S. Senate until his assassination in 1935. Although he remains a controversial figure in Louisiana history, during his years of power, great strides were made in infrastructure, education, and healthcare. John James Audubon was an American ornithologist, naturalist, and painter. For half a century, he was the young country's dominant wildlife artist. Always a proponent of animal conservation, the National Audubon Society was named in his honor. Nicknamed Satchmo, or Pops, Louie Armstrong was one of the most influential figures of jazz. Born and raised in New Orleans, he was also widely regarded as a profound influence on popular music in general, and in 2017 was inducted into the Rhythm and Blues Hall of Fame. The last section of our journey takes us through the Chamber of Horrors. We start here with Freddy Krueger from Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street. Here we see a scene from Creature from the Black Lagoon, released in 1954 by Universal Pictures. The Body Snatcher by Robert Louis Stevenson, published in 1884. Here we see an imagined meeting between a vampire and the Wolfman. The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo, published in 1831. Dracula by Bram Stoker, published in 1897. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, published in 1818. This gruesome scene is from The Corpse in the Waxworks by John Dickinson Carr. The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux, published from 1909 to 1910. This killer gorilla is from Edgar Allan Poe's The Murders in Rue Morgue, generally considered to be the first mystery novel. The Pit and the Pendulum by Edgar Allan Poe, published in 1842. Our journey ends here with Lagniappe the Cyclops. It was a New Orleans tradition for merchants to give a little something extra to customers who appreciated their trade, known as Lagniappe. This was the Wax Museum's way of bestowing a little something extra for their guests as they completed their tour. Thank you for joining me on this journey of the currently closed Musee Conti Historical Wax Museum.